coming out, and especially thank you to our sponsors and sponsoring organizations. You know, I'm a graduate of the University of Hawaii. I'm the only Republican in the State Senate of Hawaii for the last 5 years now. For 20 years I've been involved with trying to educate and inform people about the Jones Act, its impact particularly on the cost for every man, woman, and child in the state of Hawaii. We're finally getting some traction, but there's a lot of people that don't have the knowledge, don't really know the questions to ask. So that's what we're doing this tonight. So I thank Kimberly very much for putting this together, but most of all, thank you. One of the sad things is we've had people that were afraid to come or participate in the forum tonight because of perceived retaliation if they spoke out against us. More and more in Hawaii, we're seeing that in different issues, but this is an important issue. It has to do with the cost of everything that we do, everything that we bring into Hawaii, as you'll learn tonight. At this point, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce my senatorial counterpart from the ASUH and also the president of the Young Americans for Liberty, Mr. Sean Masui. John?
Thank you, Senator. To introduce myself, my name is Sean Masui, and I'm the Senator-at-Large for ASUH, but I'm also the president for the Young Americans for Liberty Club here at UH Manoa. Young Americans for Liberty is a club, is a political activist group dedicated to the teachings of individual freedoms, limited small government, and free market economics. This is a really exciting development for us, for all of us, since my club has been advocating on this issue for a couple of years now. And for example, what do you think about the cost of living here? Aren't you frustrated with how expensive a gallon of milk costs? All of a sudden you have a couple of heads turning and they're like, oh yeah, I feel you. You know, like it's true. Like, you know, they say that there's a cost of paradise, but there's an actual reason as to why things are so expensive here in Hawaii. So I really observed that that this issue does mean a lot to not only the people here in Hawaii, but also to the students here at UH Manoa. And as a millennial generation, you know, we care a lot about the cost of education, also, you know, the cost of everything here, and also about, you know, having a sustainable future. And we believe that the Jones Act severely hinders that. So
Well, I'm glad to see such a great turnout for this event. I think it's a very important issue, and I know that the more people learn about it, the more they feel that it's of interest to everybody here in the audience. When I think of this topic, I think of Henry George. In 1886, he commented, "Protectionism in all of its forms does to a nation in peacetime what the enemy would do to it in wartime." And he had the kind of fresh in his mind the American Civil War, and how during the Civil War the northern states decided that the best way to cripple the southern states is to put a blockade out to cut off their shipping, so that southern states couldn't buy things from abroad and they couldn't sell things from abroad. And they were right. It was very effective in cutting off the shipping and in crippling the economy and the military. Soon after that, soon after Henry George made his comments, a number of countries went into World War I. The British and the Germans decided the same thing. The most effective way of crippling each other's economies was to cut off the shipping with each other. The British would use their maritime fleet, their naval fleet, to cut off the access of Germany to the world's goods and services. And it cut off a lot. They couldn't get access. And the Germans tried the same thing. They sank 5,000 vessels going to and from England in the hope of crippling the English economy, and later the Americans when they entered into the war. Well, the war ended, and then it seemed that there were certain people in Congress who were bent on doing to America what foreigners would have loved to have done to the United States during that time. They restricted the kind of shipping that Americans could access in the world. With the passage of the Jones Act, it severely limited the number of choices that Americans have in the buying and selling of products around the world. The consequence has been not so happy for the merchant marine, actually, itself. The number of ships produced in America have gone down as it's been less competitive on the international market, as is often the case with protectionism. Protectionism is intended to bolster a special interest group who wants to see the benefits of protection, but often by cutting off the competitive edge, they lose their incentives to become state-of-the-art and low-cost and efficient in the same ways that others who face the competition feel. Because of the Jones Act, we're limited on what kinds of ships we're allowed to purchase and hire to take our goods to and from Hawaii. These ships could cost as much as 5 times as much in the United States as if they were made abroad. This has added enormously to the cost of living here in Hawaii, which means it cripples all of the businesses here in Hawaii who could be much more prosperous and effective by being able to sell their products to the world and to buy their ingredients and their components from the rest of the world at much lower costs. I would say that probably one of the nails in the coffin of the sugar industry here was the fact that in order to send their products to the mainland where the refining was done of raw sugar, they had to pay for much, much more expensive shipping. Competitors of theirs abroad could get cheaper shipping to send it anywhere in the world. So actually it put our producers of goods and services in Hawaii at a disadvantage compared to all of the other producers around the world. It's said that it adds as much as 30% of the cost of goods that people in Hawaii have to produce. That can be as much as maybe $3,000 per household. That's a huge expense. And that means that we're poorer for it, because it means we have less money to spend for other things that would make us richer and make it possible for us to be much more prosperous. But instead our industries struggle and often die. The sugar industry, the pineapple industry has struggled. Many other industries such as the flowers and poultry and beef that could buy things from abroad and could send things to the mainland are restricted in their ability because it's so much more costly to do so. But for national defense, well, I say that if this is for national defense, then it should be paid for by the nation, not by just the people here of Hawaii. I mean, do they say, well, there has to be a sales tax in Hawaii so that all the people of Hawaii can pay all of the costs of Pearl Harbor and Hickam Airfield and Schofield Barracks and Kaneohe Marine Corps Base? No. We expect if it's for national defense that the nation pays for it, not the people of Hawaii entirely. We can't buy the best ships from around the world because, well, they're coming from some of the best producers in the world, such as South Korea and Japan. Now, if we can't trust South Korea and Japan to provide ships for our military and for our commercial uses, then what are we doing stationing 150,000 soldiers, dependents, and civilian personnel in those countries ever since the Korean War in a mutual defense treaty where we trust them enough to put the lives of our soldiers in their countries to protect them, and yet we can't buy their products from them? We can't buy their ships from them to help in our mutual defense? It didn't stop Hawaiian Airlines from buying Airbus airplanes. That doesn't cripple Hawaii. It doesn't cripple America, the fact that Hawaiian Airlines is able to buy an airplane that's made in Europe. No, it helps us. If we're able to buy things more efficiently, that are state-of-the-art, that are younger and newer and more efficient, that's good. And it's good competition for Boeing to know that they have competition from Airbus. Imagine how complacent and slothful Boeing could be if they knew that they had a protected shield market and Americans weren't allowed to buy Airbus from abroad. And that's what happened to the textile industry in the United States. They were shielded from competition around the world and they became much less competitive and they eventually went out of business. I first came to know about this Jones Act when I was living up in Alaska. I visited the Alaska Lumber and Pulp Company. They produced pulp and they just sold it down the coastline in Seattle. But they couldn't send their pulp down the coast to Seattle directly on a Jones Act ship. It was too expensive. Instead, they sent it all the way to Japan and then back to Seattle. At enormous cost, but still cheaper than sending it on a Jones Act ship. I thought, this is ludicrous. A company doing this is going to go out of business. And they did. Just as so many businesses in Hawaii do go out of business, one of the most costly states in the nation. We have less access to shipping than Samoa or Fiji that can use foreign flag vessels. Protected monopolies always say that they are essential to national security. We can't allow competition with us because the nation depends on us. I understand the sentiment, but it's not real. I remember when AT&T used to say that we have to keep our monopoly in the long lines, long distance telephone operations in the country. As a matter of fact, well, in cities as well. Having one phone on your desk connected by a long line, that's enough for everybody. What more could they want? And calling up to Alaska from Hawaii at $10 a minute, or to the mainland for $1 a minute, that's good enough. It's for national security that we have one American company dominating all of the communications. But when they broke up the monopoly, who could have imagined all the benefits of the free market that it could have brought to us? We all have these in our pockets now. Because the free market brought about tremendous innovation and services and lower costs. It hardly costs anything now to call anywhere in the world now. And we have more than 1 million types of apps and functions available on this, not just making a phone call. That wouldn't have existed if we still had the guaranteed protected monopoly of AT&T running all of our telephone services. Now, just yesterday we celebrated Veterans Day. And I'd like to use this moment to celebrate, or at least to honor, the 37 American sailors who perished in the attack on the SS Stark in the Persian Gulf. Believe it or not, in 1987, the mission that they were there to achieve was to guarantee the freedom of the seas. And I would say that we can honor them best by saying it's not only in the Persian Gulf that we should be guaranteeing the freedom of the seas, it's in Hawaii as well. The people of Hawaii have a right to be able to choose who their shipper is going to be, because we should practice what we preach. We've been preaching to the world about the virtues of a free market over a command and control of the economy by the government. We should be practicing it and reaping the rewards of it. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Hansen, as Kim just said. I'm with an organization known as the Hawaii Shippers Council. It was organized in the 1990s, and our main focus is achieving more efficient and better shipping services between Hawaii and the mainland United States. One of the constraints in the Hawaii shipping market is the fact that there's an artificial shortage of large ocean-going ships caused by the inefficient shipbuilding industry of the United States. There are, as Kimberly's movie showed, there are only 3 remaining shipyards that are actually constructing large commercial ships of 1,000 gross tons or more. We have a very limited ship construction market, especially as compared to three countries that dominate the market, which is Japan, South Korea, and China. They build over 90% of the world's ocean-going ships today. In a typical year, Japan will produce over 300 ocean-going ships for export. South Korea will probably produce something on the order of 400 ships a year. And when we look at that in comparison to the Jones Act fleet, at the current time, the entire Jones Act fleet of ocean-going ships over 1,000 gross tons, we're looking at 79 ships, over half of which are quite elderly and expensive to operate. This is the issue that people are looking at in terms of the vessel El Faro, which complication with a hurricane, Joaquin. But the ship was 40 years old, and the questions are whether or not that contributed to her loss with all 43 persons on board. The reason that we see so many old ships in the Jones Act fleet is simply because they cost so much to construct in the United States that owners put off replacing their ships well past what would be the case in the international trades. For example, if we look at all the non-contiguous trades, that's Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, and Puerto Rico, the average age of a container ship, we're looking at something like 38 years of age. The average age in the international fleet for container ships is around 12 years. On the international side, container ships are scrapped by the time that they're 20 years of age. We see this as a major constraint in the economies not only of Hawaii but also Alaska and Puerto Rico and Guam, and believe that we would have a more vibrant, more competitive shipping industry if the Jones Act were changed or reformed just for the non-contiguous trade to allow the use of foreign-built U.S. flag ships. This would mean that just like Hawaiian Airlines can go and purchase, which they do, an Airbus, bring it into the United States, register it as a U.S. aircraft, and operate it domestically. We're advocating for the point of view where a U.S. shipping company could purchase a container ship or a tanker or whatever the case may be from a yard in South Korea, for example, and bring it, import it into the U.S. commerce, registered as a U.S. flag, and meet the other conditions of coastwise trading, including U.S. crew, U.S. management, etc. Not only would this bring down the capital cost of the ships quite considerably, we're looking at the differential between a U.S. shipyard and a shipyard in South Korea being 5 times. So this is a substantial barrier to entry. It means that new shipping companies can't start up in the domestic trades because the high cost of the vessels. The animal agriculture industry here in Hawaii has just about come to an end because of a lack of being able to import bulk grains from the U.S. mainland. These are all situations which could have been different or could be different in the future with a build exemption that was applicable to the non-contiguous trades. And it's also interesting to note that the 2 main builders of large ocean-going ships in the United States, they have an agreement with Daewoo shipbuilding and marine engineering in South Korea, which is the largest shipbuilder in the world. And Daewoo provides NASSCO with all of the design for its commercial ships. It provides the main engines, most of the equipment, and arranges for much of the supply because they can purchase those items much more cheaply than NASSCO can. So essentially, NASSCO is assembling a ship in the United States, and we pay 5 times more for that privilege. For example, one of the new container ships for tote was recently delivered from NASSCO, and on the ocean trials, the Daewoo engineers were on board as part of the sea trials. The shipyard in Philadelphia, where Matson is building its 2 new ships, has an agreement with Hyundai Mipo Dockyard on a similar basis. And the Matson ships were essentially designed in South Korea and being outfitted from South Korea, though assembled in Philadelphia. This is the state of shipbuilding that we have in the United States. We're not really competitive in shipbuilding for larger vessels. All these other industries that are subject to cabotage are allowed to import their transportation equipment from foreign sources, and there's no reason why shipping cannot do the same. Thank you.
So we learned a little bit about why we have ship shortage here in Hawaii and the other non-contiguous trades, and why we have import substitution. We start to have United States importing goods from other countries because it's cheaper to ship it from them. So when we have import substitution, it hurts American companies. Okay, our next speaker is Danny Asau. He is the general manager of Honolulu Port.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. I'm a local boy, grew up in Hawaii and lived in Maui for 20 years. Grew up in Honolulu. And we, as we grow up, we hear the saying, everybody goes, oh wow, so expensive over here. Well, people say, oh, that's the price we pay for paradise. Well, if you take 10,000 people, maybe one of those people out of the 10,000 will tell you they know what the Jones Act is. How many of you heard about the Jones Act before you came here? Most of you. But if you go out in the street today and you ask people, you're not going to find anybody that knows what the Jones Act is. And as a local boy growing up in Hawaii, faced with the challenges of sustainability, housing, food costs, buying a car, all those commodities that we get here, people say, well, it doesn't affect housing. And if you explain it to them, oh boy, it does. It affects every commodity we have here in Hawaii. Building materials come on the boat. Aside from the things made here in Hawaii, those made here in Hawaii corporations still do depend on commodities that come to Hawaii from the outside. So everybody's affected by it. And it's important to know these things because, for example, I'm just going to use Home for the 1990s, so 3,000 vehicles, new vehicles in 1990. And through the years, the foreign makers have been getting stronger because they can ship their vehicles here cheaper. They don't have to. They don't have to abide by the Jones Act. So, last time I checked, I live here in Hawaii. I got American stripes on me. So here in Hawaii, we should benefit from having American vehicles sent here on the same playing field, John.
It seems like when we hear this on the political stage, the most common argument is, can anyone guess? The national security argument, saying that we need the Jones Act for national security reasons. But could the opposite be true? Could it be that an exemption or a change to the Jones Act could actually increase our national security?
There's 3 basic arguments, national defense arguments, in support of the cabotage laws of the United States. The first one is to support, with commercial construction, the shipbuilding industrial base of the United States. The second one is in support of sea lift, meaning the ability and the capacity to transport military materiel to overseas contingencies, is to maintain an adequate merchant marine, that is, trained crews that can operate ships. The problem with all these three arguments is that the fleet has declined to such a point. Shipbuilding is commercial on the commercial side, at two ships a year, 2 or 3 ships a year, is so small that it really won't support the construction of naval vessels. In fact, the Navy today is facing the same kinds of cost problems with naval construction in the United States as on the commercial side. The cost of building naval ships now is increased to such a point where the U.S. can no longer afford to maintain an adequate fleet. The higher the cost of each ship, the fewer the number of ships that they can actually build. On the sea lift side, most of the sea lift today, a group of ships known as the U.S. flag International Trade Fleet. This fleet is entirely foreign built, operating U.S. flag, and about half are foreign owned. And they provide the great bulk of the sea lift today. And the third one is maintaining an adequate merchant marine in terms of the seamen that are there serving on the ships. Because the fleet is constricted so much, we're not really maintaining that large a base in any one of these three areas that we would be able to expand quickly to meet the requirements of a World War type situation is not really in the cards. Even during World War II, for example, the construction of the Liberty ships, the T2 tankers, was done in yards that were constructed entirely for the purpose of building those particular ships. Henry J. Kaiser and some of the other guys who were involved in that. And this was something that had to be started at the time that the requirements became known. Those yards were constructed, they built a phenomenal number of ships, and then almost as soon as the war was over and the government was no longer buying those ships, most of those yards closed.
Just in very simple terms, if it costs this amount for one ship, or the same amount for 5 ships, you're better off having 5 ships, and you have a lot more employment for sailors and merchant marine personnel as well.
What type of impact would Jones Act reform have on the unions here in Hawaii and the workforce that we see here on the island? I know that some people have told me that they were afraid to come to the convention, and that they fear speaking out against the Jones Act due to some of the sentiment of the union workers and perhaps the people who would stand to lose from this. But last year I ran my campaign based on the idea that reform to the Jones Act would actually help the unions, grow and have greater control of our force. Now, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
With respect to maritime jobs in Hawaii, would not have any change in the cabotage laws would not affect, for example, the stevedores that are working on the dock. Regardless of the flag of the ship, someone's got to be able to load and unload the ships. We think that given that spectrum of reform, that would allow the U.S. flag fleet in the non-contiguous trades to expand and increase the number of shipboard jobs.
I wonder what you suggest we do. What can we do to help you accomplish the goals you've set forth tonight?
This forum is meant to blend the academic world with the business world to start solving some of the problems of Hawaii. We have to start here. As Danny pointed out, very few people know what the Jones Act is. We need to educate our public and our business owners so that they can put, step 2, pressure on our congressional delegates. As of now, none of them are interested in reforming it. Then, once we put pressure on them, they need to introduce legislation to amend the Jones Act for us, ask for a targeted exemption from the U.S. build for 1,000 gross ton or larger vessels for only the non-contiguous trades, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and by route, Guam would benefit from that as well.
Hi, my name is Victor Lim, and I'm a restaurant owner. I also sit on the board for the Hawaii Restaurant Association, and I also sit on the board of the National Restaurant Association. And I just want to let you know that Jones Act affect the food on the table. When you buy food, because when a container coming from the Asia is half the cost of the container coming from the West Coast. And the fact that Hawaii, with our 1.5 million people, but we have about 8 million tourists a year, we do not grow nearly enough food to sustain everybody. So the majority of what we eat comes from the mainland. And if we can reduce the cost of freight coming through, it will reduce the price of eggs, milk, bread, rice, you name it. Whatever you eat will get impacted because more than 80–90% of the food consumed in Hawaii comes from out of state and not from us. And I talked to my fellow counterparts from Alaska and Puerto Rico, and they're just like us. They know Jones Act, but the rest of the people in the country do not know what is Jones Act. And the Act of Congress require tremendous amount of education, starting with our own delegations, but it would not change unless all of us really continue to bring it up as a top of mind issue that affect our pocketbook. So thank you.
My name is Alan Liam. I'm the chapter president at HBU for Young Americans for Liberty. I just had a question about, because for Senator Inouye, just to get the exemption for the Pride of America cruise ship, he was the most senior senator, and he was also like the head of the Ways and Means Committee. So he had a lot of power, and yet all he could do was get that cruise ship. So it seems to me like outside of just going through the federal lines of trying to get this exemption, what can we look at from our state representatives locally in trying to incentivize getting more people to ship to Hawaii as sort of like a midpoint almost, if that's even a possibility?
I'm from the Inland Boatmen's Union of the Pacific, and we're mariners. We are the sailors and mariners who man these U.S. tugs. You've underestimated, I believe, the security risk to not having American ships between Hawaii and the mainland. This is a fortress in the middle of the Pacific, if you didn't notice. First of all, the Jones Act protects from foreign ships taking cargo between two U.S. ports. So if it's so much cheaper to have foreign ships do this, why isn't there stuff coming here from Canada at a cheaper rate and going back to Canada? And why doesn't it come from Mexico at a cheaper rate and go back to Mexico? There's a lot of reasons for it. There's a supply of economy of scale. We are a small place in the middle of the ocean. And relatively speaking, it doesn't cost that much to supply this place with American ships. The system works good. What's left of the American maritime industry doesn't need any help from you destroying it. And there's talking about opening a door, not just you say, well, we don't want to get rid of the whole Jones Act, we just want to get rid of the shipbuilding. Are we going to give every industry in our country away until we don't have anything at all? And every country that you mentioned that has a large shipbuilding industry, that country subsidizes the shipbuilding industry.
Let's start with the solution to the shipbuilding. Why don't you start with that first? Do you have any solutions for that?
I don't have for the left bit. It's expensive, but cheaper is not necessarily better. And as a country, we're left with a service industry only. We don't make anything. And it's not because we're inefficient or we're not good workers. It's because you're willing to sell the whole country out, and there's nothing left. Carry this to the extreme. Suppose if you want to take out the supply line deliverers, why not just outsource the military to somebody else? I'm sure there's lots of countries that run the military for us a lot cheaper. Does that sound like a good idea? There's a lot of distortion in your whole argument. You're trying to fix something that isn't broken.
I would say there's a lot of distortion in what you're saying to begin with. And the fact of it is that there's a huge cost for things like milk here. Milk is enormously more expensive here than it is on the West Coast, for example.
And where are we living? We're living in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles from the mainland, and considering how far the stuff is shipped, and it's shipped in good order, safely, and with...
And who's going to disrupt the supply lines if we were to acquire some foreign-built U.S. flagged ships? How is that going to... Can you explain to me how that would disrupt the supply lines? I don't see any direct disruption at all.
Not right, that particular item.
I didn't hear you. Can you speak up?
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know how this mic works, I guess. But I don't understand how you feel like I'm talking about the entire destruction of the Jones Act, which is what you're really trying for. You're just using this as another...
Well, let's just take Guam, for example. Guam, Midway, Wake, and Kingman Reef have been exempt from the U.S. build requirement of the Jones Act for the better part of 90 years. And I don't see any slippery slope there, do you?
I think there's a slippery slope when we have, like you said, a very few shipbuilding companies left in the country.
Sure.
Why would you want to get rid of them? The last one?
I mean, because they're too expensive. You know, the thing is that for example, the 2 new ships that are being built for Matson at Akron, Philadelphia, those ships were designed in South Korea by Hyundai. They weren't designed in the United States. The main engines are coming from Korea.
They're not actually, they come from Germany and Finland.
No, they're not coming from Germany. They're coming from South Korea. They're being manufactured in South Korea. They're being built under license to the German company, yes, but they're being manufactured in South Korea.
Under license to the German company, yes. Well, at how far
So, I mean,
do you want to carry this thing where we end up with 1% of the people in this country owning 90% of the wealth? And people living in the street and things getting nothing but worse, and you want to take the last good union jobs away from Hawaii?
We're not talking about taking any union jobs.
That's what you're doing, my friend.
How the heck are we going to do that?
Just like you're doing it.
No, he mentioned about the steel. Okay, I'm working with so many companies here in Hawaii that import steel. We try to bring those steel cheaper. We even want to try to bring it to Manzanillo, to Mexico. What happened is, if you bring it from Mexico, it's only going to cost like $5,000 a flat rack, a 44 flat rack container. Okay? If it comes from LA, it's $7,000. From Manzanillo, it's like 45 or $5 grand. We have to go through customs. The U.S. customs costs $2,000 to get here. You have to pay the tariff. These folks doesn't understand how much costs to bring those cargo. Our job as a freight forwarder, we're trying the best logistic routing we can to bring to Hawaii the cheapest way so our business owners can sell the products. Because so you and me, all of us can afford the goods.
That's a very good point you made about steel. The steel industry wanted to disallow Americans from buying foreign steel. They put up very, very high trade barriers. All they did was that crippled the automobile industry, because they have to compete with the world of automobiles. If they have to buy very expensive American steel, and they can't buy lower cost steel, then they can't produce in America. That's when they started moving their factories, the automobile factories, abroad, because they were forced to use very expensive ingredients in their automobiles here. So you can protect and shield one industry from competition, protect them from freedom of choice, but then you just hurt the next industry down the line and has to pay for that.
And my question is actually one that was brought to my attention by an advisor, and her question was, so if we get this Jones Act exemption, how do you propose we address environmental concerns regarding invasive species entering our environment?
In terms of environmental concerns, what we're proposing is exemption from the build requirement, so the ships would still be U.S. flagged. the ships would be conducting exactly the same transactions that they are today. In terms of environmental concerns, what we would want to have is the newer, more efficient ships that consume less fuel, produce less exhaust, and that is best achieved with newer, lower-cost ships that you can obtain from South Korea or Japan, as opposed to the shipyards in the United States.
So my question is, how do you overcome the power of special interests in moving any type of exemption forward? Meaning, Alaska and Hawaii, who have skin in the game on getting an exemption on shipping, have a total of 7 delegates in their congressional party. If I were Matson, who made $25 million in profits in the first quarter of 2015, and I give money to the 10 delegates of Missouri, I've now wiped out any political influence you have on changing anything to do with the Jones Act and spending very minimal amounts of money to get that political influence. What are the ways to overcome that, to get an exemption for Hawaii and Alaska?
Educate the population, vote out those people that don't support your state.
And that's exactly my point. The state of Missouri has...
Oh, okay, so let me go further on that. So, yes, we are outnumbered just as the non-contiguous trades, but there's also support in New York. There's a very large Puerto Rican population, and they talk to Puerto Rico. And there's a number of other states that we can talk to. Incidentally, this affects all of the United States, but we carry the burden more so because we're not connected and don't have other choices, right? So I believe we can work out the math and slowly build coalitions in Congress. But we have to start with our own. It has to be introduced by Alaska or Hawaii because the others want to follow. Puerto Rico and Guam are asking for the states to do it.
A better quality ships. You mentioned, foreign ships don't necessarily mean better ships. But the reality is behind the Jones Act is that if you really want better products in the economy, what you want to do is you want to introduce competition. And the Jones Act works directly against that because what the Jones Act does is it protects American manufacturing of ships from foreign ships that might be of a better quality. So that's the first thing. The second point you mentioned, and I'll finish up here, is you were concerned about wealth dissipating from the 90% into the 1% hands, or that the 1% have 90% of the wealth. And I would just say that the Jones Act actually exacerbates that problem if you perceive that to be a problem. Because what the Jones Act does is that it takes what would be cheaper prices for Hawaii consumers, for consumers all around the country, and it shifts those prices to profits of American special interests. And I don't mean to be volatile, I don't mean to be negative. I think we have the same goals here. I just think that the right avenue to reach those goals is actually to repeal the Jones Act. Thanks.
I would say that in a globalized economy, it appears as though manufacturing and production in the United States is at a severe disadvantage vis-a-vis wages in the world economy, because they're competing with low-cost, low-wage workers all over the world. So those jobs were likely to evaporate whether we had the Jones Act or not. All throughout our history, since the Founding Fathers, we had a system based on tariffs. Hamilton was in favor of it. I don't think his political nemesis Jefferson was against it. And all through our history, this protected American industries and American workers and built prosperity in this nation. And ever since the free trade regime has been instituted, whenever it was decades ago, American workers are at a disadvantage and have seen their standard of living drop.
We have a different opinion about the value of free markets.
the United States' great virtue throughout its history that made it the largest economy in the world, which it still is today, should not be afraid of the rest of the world because they have low wages and can outcompete. The best way to compete with them is for the United States government to not make it more expensive for American businesses. And the Jones Act makes it much more expensive for American companies to compete. So their solution, I mean, if you're a sugar company, you can say, well, I can stay in Hawaii, but I can't ship my stuff from here, so I'll move to the Philippines. That's a way to drive businesses away from America, and then Americans lose jobs that way. So I'd say that we have a different opinion about what the virtues of a free market are. My evidence would be that of the Fraser Institute in Canada that measures countries of the world that have free markets and free trade. They are much more likely to be very prosperous, much more likely to be growing much more faster, and it's usually where people in the world want to go. They want to go to countries like that experience freer markets and away from countries that have controlled and corrupt markets.